Hi, this is a podcast for GCSE English language students. This video is looking at the creative writing unit and in particular the narrative writing, in other words short story. This is worth 7.5% of your final grade and you've got your controlled assessment coming up before Christmas. So hopefully this podcast will give you hints or a helping hand into how to structure and how to plot and what characters you need for your short story. If you'd like to look for a podcast for the GCSE descriptive writing unit, there is also one of these on BPC English, so have a look in the BPC English YouTube page and you should be able to find that. So hopefully by the end of this podcast you'll feel a bit more confident and you'll feel able to walk into the controlled assessment a bit like this guy. So here are your controlled assessment titles. These are a rough guide, but you should write a story close to one of these. So write a story that begins with the words Mum and Dad shouted up the stairs, come down here now. B, write about a time you felt embarrassed. C, the school reunion. D, write a story that ends with the words how wrong he was. E, the interview. Now obviously these aren't the most exciting titles in the world. They're a bit like the descriptive writing ones, a little bit dull. The whole point is, and the way you're being assessed is, you've got to try to make these interesting. So at the moment they seem boring and dull, but hopefully by the end of your short story you would have turned it into an interesting piece of work. So for the narrative controlled assessment, like I said, it's worth 7.5% of your final grade. This makes the creative writing unit worth 15%. So this means by Christmas, if you've already done your spoken language, you would have done 25% of the GCSE. The word count is 750, so this equates to about a page and a paragraph. This is the controlled assessment we're looking at. The title is She Realised It Was a Mistake as Soon as She Turned the Corner. This is an A-star version and it's actually 850 words. The way the word count works is that it's normally 10% either way, so you may be having 75 less than the word count you probably get away with. You're probably not going to get marked too harshly if you go over slightly, but you shouldn't really be writing more than 2 pages for your short story. So narrative writing is written in either the third person or first person. For the majority of you will be doing it in the first person, because for the creative writing unit you need to do one in the third person and one in the first person. Most of you have written in the third person for your descriptive writing about the fireworks of the January sales. You need to tell a story which has a beginning, middle and end. You're probably going to follow one character, but you're going to encounter other characters. So what I mean by realistic, that you've got to make your characters believable. Even if they're not in a believable situation, we need to believe in the characters. And you can have some dialogue. So in the descriptive writing you may have used a little bit of dialogue, but in this one we should have actually have a conversation. But you certainly wouldn't want dialogue to dominate. You'd only want a little bit of dialogue and for a specific purpose. And it needs to be event-based, i.e. you need to have something interesting happen in your story. So if you're doing the narrative writing as the second controlled assessment or creative writing, there are lots of good things about it. First of all, a lot of people in my group felt more comfortable with writing with the first person. So in the narrative writing you can use I. It is a first person narration. So like I say, it's first person point of view, you're the narrator. So this is good for personal accounts. So if you're writing something from your own experiences, then this will help you. You can use SPAMO for your controlled assessment. So similes, personification, alliteration, metaphors and onomatopoeia. You can also use sensory language in your controlled assessment. So what you see, hear, etc. So features of a narrative writing or a story are, you're going to have a plot, so what happens. You're going to have characters, the people or animals in the story, and you can have a setting where the story or narrative takes place. So in this section now we're going to look at how to plot a story. Most stories will follow the plot structure that we're going to look at now. So the first part is the beginning. This is setting the scene and introducing the characters. The next part is the development. This is where the situation is developed and you may introduce more characters or give more depth to the one character. Problem. This is where something happens to complicate the lives of the character in some way. A climax. This is where a decisive moment is reached or matters come to a head, suspense is high. So this would be if it was a James Bond film, this would be where the villain was killed. And then an ending or a resolution. This is where matters are resolved and some sort of satisfactory end is reached. So maybe this is where it goes back to normal or something is changed, going to change forever. So after Christmas, we're all going to be looking at Of Mice and Men, and probably 95% of you have already read Of Mice and Men. So if we look how that structure relates to Of Mice and Men, the beginning would be George and Lenny at the lake talking about their dreams and talking about the farm they want, but it's also setting up who George and Lenny are. The development is when they get to the bunkhouse, they get to the ranch, they start doing well at the ranch, they start working hard, it looks like their dream might become a reality. The problem is Curly's wife's introduced, and that ends up being with Curly's wife's death. The climax is that George kills Lenny, and the ending is that George starts a new life without Lenny, some ways good in good ways and some way in negative ways. So if we read the A-star version, and we'll see how the plot relates to that. She realised it was a mistake as soon as she turned the corner. That's the title. That would have been given from the exam board a couple of years ago. I realised as soon as I walked round the corner I've made a huge mistake. I scan the surrounding faces, each pair of eyes is staring right at me, wondering who I am. Murmuring as one, I see them look me up and down, from my peep-toe black platforms and fishnets to the specially bought bunny ears resting on top of my chocolate brown curls. I've always loved a party, but the bit beforehand is just as great. The bit when you're blasting girls around through the speakers, dancing around in your pants and watching yourself in the mirror as you sing better than Cheryl Cole into a hairbrush. The hours spent cleansing, exfoliating and moisturising, plucking and polishing, along with all the other verbs that no one really knows the meaning of, but just must be done. Not to mention the time spent trying to get the perfect balance between au naturel and the who invited the clown look. I was pretty sure I'd mastered this by now, however, so I can't deny the confidence oozing from me as I strutted up to the lane to Katie Prescott's annual fancy dress party. This will be the first year, I thought to myself, that I won't make an utter fool of myself. No embarrassing incidents like the previous years, oh no. I remember 2 years ago when Katie's star had first risen. Her popularity was such that she simply had to be the one having to have the huge house party. The excitement buzzed around school as everybody compared notes on the fancy dress outfits they bought for Katie Prescott's party, the social highlight of the year. I had felt the same, of course, painstakingly dressed in the Wonder Woman outfit I'd taken months to choose. Disaster struck halfway through the party, however, when I had to be picked up by my father and taken to the accident and emergency section of our local hospital, because I could not open my eyes. The glue of the fantastic looking but calamitous fake eyelashes had sealed to my lower lid. I have opted for mascara ever since. It was Katie's last party that was responsible for me only now, a year on being able to live down the nickname Polka Dot. After visiting one of the many bathrooms in Katie's huge house, and following the routine mirror check to smooth out my bouncing curls, reapply eyeliner and reassure myself that my teeth were lipstick free, I returned to the party. It took only minutes for the entire room to notice my Pocahontas skirt, tucked into my bright pink and white polka dot knickers. My cheeks still burn a blazing crimson whenever I'm reminded, of which is not an infrequent experience, and the memory of the hysterical fits of laughter is never far from my ears. I shuddered, trying to shake the memory from my head as I focused on climbing the steep lane to Katie's home in my 2 high heels. Nothing like that will happen this year, I thought. The only memories from this party will be great ones. I stand here now under the hot glare of each and every person around me, not knowing if I should laugh or cry at my naivety. Katie Prescott runs over to me, dressed ever so coolly in denim shorts and a sky blue blouse, her golden locks bound against the slender frame and sun-kissed skin, reflecting the shine from the setting sun. "Liv," she shouts, once she gets over to me, placing her hands on both my shoulders in a protective gesture to, I presume, shield me from the silent crowd. "Didn't you get the message?" She hisses in a lower tone, an expression of genuine concern on her face. "It's not fancy dress." "Really, Katie?" I say without thought, unable to hide my sarcasm, because here I was thinking everyone had dressed up as the cast of 90210, and that I'm just the only one who went a little adventurous this year. Katie winces at my remark, but I see she sympathises. "I'm sorry." The rims of her eyes are perfectly encased in black liquid eyeliner, and her long, thick lashes are coated in precisely applied mascara. But it's the sparkling blue eyes behind the makeup that really draws attention, and it's these that assure me she's telling me the truth. This must be so embarrassing for you. I look down at myself. In that split second, my patent knockoff Jimmy Choos gleam back at me as the disappearing sun just catches them. The pale skin of my not-so-shabby legs blazes through the fishnet tights I very daringly chose to wear. My little black dress, the staple of so many party wardrobes, could appear to be classy, until the white plush bunny tail I'd stitched on the back comes flooding back to me. Looking back up, my eyes are wide open with lashes fluttering appealingly, and most importantly, there are no polka dots in sight. What are you talking about? I smile, clearly taking Katie by surprise. I think I look fantastic. So the marker gave that 19 out of 20. Remember, 13 marks is for content, so how interesting, what stylistic features you used. And for this, the person got 13 out of 14. For spelling, punctuation and grammar, they got 6 out of 6. So the examiner said for spelling, punctuation and grammar, this piece easily achieves BAM 4. There is clear evidence of accurate punctuation and spellings with very few errors. They also use a bit more ambitious punctuation, so semicolons are used throughout, well as irregular and complex vocabulary. For the content, the marker has said this is an engaging and consciously constructed plot. It's not entirely original. In fact, some of my students, since me reading this, have told me it's from the film Mean Girls. So this writer has used a film for inspiration. It says the main character is effectively constructed and self-deprecating and wry humour works well. There's a decent range of appropriate vocab and some sophistication and expression. An engaging read. So basically this is saying that for the teenage audience that probably is going to read this, it's very engaging and appealing for them. The beginning for this one would be, she's been looked at, she's the odd one out, something is wrong. The development is she's getting ready in a bedroom, almost like a teenage girl, singing into a hairbrush, getting ready, applying makeup. The problem is that we are told as readers that she's already embarrassed herself at a few different parties with various mishaps. The climax is, even though we're given a hint in the setting, the climax is we find out she's not at a fancy dress party, but she's dressed up like a Playboy bunny. And the ending is she reacts in an unexpected way. So she doesn't cry, she doesn't run out. She remembers the past experiences of being embarrassed and she uses it to her advantage, and she reacts in an unexpected way by saying, I think I look fantastic. In your setting, in your opening, you need to grab the reader's attention and create a powerful impression. You also need to introduce the main character, describe the setting, and build mood and atmosphere to draw them in. So in your first paragraph, you want to hook the reader to get them to want to read more. So if we look at setting, your story has to take place somewhere. Make sure you describe the place in some detail. The smallest amount will interest the person who is marking your paper. So if we look at this picture, if you describe this in your story with the makeup, the mirror, the DVDs in the back, the posters on the wall, you probably realise that this setting would be a teenage girl's bedroom. However, if you describe these sort of things, stinky trainers, a stale sandwich, a pizza, a lad's mag, car photos, blaring radio, it would probably infer to the reader that this is a boy's bedroom. So the way you use your first paragraph to describe the setting will tell the reader a lot about your narrative. So if we look at the setting of the A-star example, it says, I realise as soon as I walk around the corner I've made a huge mistake. I scan the surrounding faces, each pair of eyes is staring right at me, wondering who I am. Murmuring as one, I see them look me up and down, from my peep-toe platforms and fishnets to the specially bought bunny ears resting on the top of my chocolate brown curls. So this setting, this few sentences tells us a few things straight away. One, it's not a particularly boring setting. Straight away, they put us right into the action. So with where the writer puts each pair of eyes, straight away that we know something is wrong. That this person is surrounded by lots of different people, and for some reason they're staring at her. So the reader is almost asking themselves straight away, well, what's happened? I've gone right into the action here. What's happened to this person? Again, the use of the word murmuring shows us that something is wrong. So murmuring almost means people gossiping, or the impression of maybe people talking behind this person's back. The fact that they're specially bought, so that phrase tells us this isn't a person wearing a ball gown or jeans and t-shirt. Straight away, this has been bought for a specific reason. And the brown curls gives a bit of a description of the main character. That probably straight away that we know this is a woman, but probably chocolate brown girls also shows the reader we're maybe thinking about a teenage girl. The fact here that it's also bunny ears probably is going to show the reader that either it's Easter or this is a fancy dress party, and for some reason this woman is dressed in the incorrect way. So publishers say that books are sold on the opening first two sentences. So here are some famous examples. This is from 1984. It was a bright cold day in April and the clocks were striking 13. So straight away it's a strange opening, but obviously a clock doesn't strike 13, so straight away the reader would be thinking, oh, what's going on here? Peter Pan, it begins with all children except one grow up. Another interesting opening. In one of my favourite books by Albert Camus, The Stranger, the first line is mother died today or maybe yesterday. I can't be sure. Because obviously that is completely different to 99.9% of everyone who would have something like that happen to them. So it's interesting opening, wants you to read more. So there are lots of ways that you can open your story. So one way is to use dialogue. So hands in the air, this is a stick up, he hollered roughly, gets you straight into the action. Another way is to use a statement. You could use action, so something happened, something exciting happening. A description of someone, or a description of the time, so straight away it tells us where we are in the day. So the first sentence or so in the A* example is, I realise as soon as I walk around the corner, I have made a huge mistake. The person could have even just used the second part of that sentence. I have made a huge mistake. Straight away, it gets the reader's attention. What mistake have they made? What's happening around the corner? It's an interesting, engaging opening. So in the development where we're telling more about the character, straight away it just tells us a little bit more. This is a teenage girl. You're probably not going to get too many teenage boys or 45-year-old men or even 45-year-old women dancing in their pants with a hairbrush listening to Cheryl Cole. Obviously it can be done, but it's probably going to suggest to the reader this is a teenage girl. So like I mentioned in the descriptive writing, although you should mention physical description in the narrative, you should also concentrate on action. So if we look again at the build-up paragraph, all the parts here are the doing words or action in this paragraph. So blasting, dancing, watching, sing, cleansing, exfoliating, moisturising, plucking, polishing, strutted. So this shows the reader story has got a bit of a pace to it, but also gives an image to the reader of what this person is doing. So again, it gives us a really good image here of a teenage girl getting ready for a party and all the beauty treatments that she does. Again, like the descriptive piece of writing, you've also got to show, not tell. Boring D-grade response would be saying the man is bored. But if you show me how physically he's bored, it's more ambitious and will get you higher marks. So impatiently, the mustachioed man tapped his fingers. So there's lots of ways you could show someone is impatient. So they could be looking at their iPhone to see what the time is. They could be playing a game on their iPhone. They could be looking at their watch. They could be tapping their fingers. They could be shifting around. All physical signs of someone who's not comfortable. So that is much more ambitious, much more interesting than just saying the man is bored or the man is frustrated. So you must make sure that you do that in your short story. So if we look at the end now, so there are lots of ways that you can end your story. You could do an open ending when a story fails to provide a satisfying closure and leaves the reader with questions, gaps they need to fill in. You could do the opposite and do a close ending where all the threads are neatly tied. Or you could do a twist ending when a story takes an unexpected turn. So the ending to the A* version is, looking back up, my eyes are wide open with the lashes flutting appealingly. And most importantly, there are no polka dots in sight. What are you talking about? I smile, clearly taking Katie by surprise. I think I look fantastic. So the reason this ending works well is it goes against the audience's expectations. So from reading the story, we could probably imagine that this girl may run away or cry or be really upset as she's been embarrassed before. But actually what happens is, and what should happen with most characters is they actually take a journey. So at the start of the story a few years ago when she's going to these parties, she would have been upset. But she's learned in the last few parties, the last few years, that these things don't really matter. That being embarrassed doesn't really matter. It's all about enjoying the moment and living in the moment. So she's realised that it doesn't really matter if she has these little embarrassing moments. She just got to live through it and carry on. So I think I look fantastic is almost her embracing the fact that, well, life does throw up these things, but you've just got to carry on. So I've underlined looking back up because she's almost thinking, oh, what do I do? She's then the writer goes back, almost flashes back to the previous things we've talked about. So one example at the party where she had a mishap was where her eyelashes stuck together. And the other example was where she got her polka dots pants, dress stuck in her polka dot pants. So she's almost mentioning these things here as she's almost having a flashback to those things, and she's realising those things don't really matter. And then, what are you talking about? I smile, so the audience knows that this is going to end in a happy way, clearly taking Katie by surprise. We're wondering what she's going to say, and she just ends with a very short sentence, I look fantastic. So a short sentence used for effect, used to make it stand out, and it almost leaves the reader with sort of a happy feeling that this girl is happy and almost that she's been victorious at the end of this party and nothing else can touch her. So looking at character, for a C with your character, you've got to focus on 1 or 2 characters. Remember, you've only got a page and a paragraph, so I would at the maximum have 3 characters, but I'd probably only focus on 1 or 2. In the descriptive writing, I asked you not to describe your character's appearance too much. In the narrative, you should describe people's appearance a little bit, but not too much, but you should definitely comment on it. And also, you need to give your character a rounded personality in life. So this basically means make your character realistic. You can put your character in an unrealistic or strange situation, but your audience must, or your reader must, believe in your character, and you've got to try to make your character interesting. So if we look at this character, the way a character is described can tell us lots of things. So for example, a character whose clothes are too big could be someone who's lost a lot of weight. It could be someone who can't afford new clothes. A character who never smiles, maybe they're miserable, maybe they don't like their teeth, maybe something traumatic has recently happened to them. A scar on a character's face might mean that someone's been in a fight, like this guy. It might mean that they've been in hospital. It might mean they're an actor who's playing a victim on a TV show. A character who sleeps during the day and lives at night. This could be a vampire. This could be a DJ. This could be a nocturnal animal. This could be a nurse who works a night shift. A character only speaks the bare minimum word. So this might be someone who's miserable. It might be someone with a stutter. It might be a police suspect who doesn't want to give anything away in an interview. So the point of this is, the way a character is described will tell the audience lots of things. So you've got to make sure that you describe your character in the way that you want to give over to the audience. So another example, this guy here, this is actually an image from The Shining. So you could say that this guy is scared. You could say he's frightened. You could say he's bored because there's no one else around. You could say that he's taken his frustration. You might say he's absolutely insane. He's mad. Has created this character well, and that this character is believable. The self-deprecating humour basically means that the character is not afraid to take the mickey out of herself. So for example here, it says, here we've got no embarrassing moments like last year, oh no. So it's almost written in a bit of a sarcastic, humorous way. So from the second paragraph onwards, the writer does give us the impression of a typical teenage girl enjoying herself, having a bit of fun while she gets ready for a party. It's also quite interesting how we are introduced to the other character, Katie Prescott. First of all, she is mentioned straight away as Katie Prescott, which would probably show to the reader that this isn't going to be the person's best friend. If you refer to someone as the full name, it probably means you might not dislike them. They're probably certainly not your favourite person. But also look at the way this writer introduces the character. When Katie's star had first risen, her popularity was such that she simply had to be the one having the house party, the social highlight of the year, after visiting one of the many bathrooms in Katie's huge house. So this person is as who every girl would want to be. So she's the most popular girl in the school. Going around to her house is a social highlight, and she's got a massive house, so she's really rich. So it's almost like this is a wish fulfillment of who every girl wants to be. In the second page, she's then described in appearance as perfectly encased black eyeliner. So almost the opposite to the Liv character. She gets her mascara stuck and she goes to hospital. This character does it in an absolute perfect way. So almost comparing the two characters. However, she could easily be characterised as a cliched prom queen, a bit of a cruel bully, like maybe a character from Mean Girls. However, through the story, the narrator does actually show that she actually thinks the girl is actually nice, despite the fact that she may be a bit envious of her. So the fact that the story isn't about the girl being stitched up and made to dress up as a fancy dress party and it being a joke on her. It is actually a genuine mistake. So it says, the eyes assure me she is telling the truth. This must be embarrassing for her. So this shows that the Katie Prescott is actually honest and is actually a nice person. She actually does care for how the other girl is feeling. We will be having dialogue in this narrative short story. So what you need to make sure you do is when you do the dialogue, you don't put every time he said, she said. It will become very repetitive, very dull, and it will not gain you high marks. So instead of said, we could say the following things: replied, answered, responded, coughed, whispered, stuttered, expressed, announced, stated, remarked, commented. and then all of these on the right hand side too. So not only are these more interesting, but they are far more descriptive than he said, she said. Saying someone shouted gives you a better impression about how the person is feeling than said. Saying stuttered shows you the person is nervous. If you just put he said, she said, you won't be able to give that impression to your reader. Writing too is that you need to use different sentence starters in your short story. So that means you shouldn't be starting sentence with a or the all the time. Again, like he said, she said, it will become very boring, very dull if every single sentence starts with the or a. So there are lots of different ways you can do this. So for example, you could start with an adverb. So those of you who've forgotten, an adverb is a word that describes a doing word. So for example, the verb in this sentence is picked. But if you say carefully, John picked up the package, the carefully describes how it's picked up. So you can use that as the start of your sentence. So for example, impatiently, comma, you must remember the comma, the mustachioed man tapped his fingers onto the desk. You could also start with a verb, an ing word. So for example, running down the hill, John tripped over is more interesting than just John tripped over as he ran down the hill. So verb, ing word. You could also start with an adjective or a descriptive word. So for example, petrified, comma, Joey stood rooted to the spot. So that's a lot more interesting than just starting with Joey. So petrified, comma. You could start with two adjectives. So for example, bored and exasperated, comma, I stared at his exam. All I could hear was just sharp snip of the scissors. You could start with a simile, but obviously you wouldn't want to start with a simile every time because it would sound a bit repetitive and a bit strange. So like a swooping hawk, comma, she seized her prey. So this is one thing actually that the A star piece didn't actually do too much. Although it doesn't start with the or a, it doesn't really use too many interesting sentence starters. The ones that we could pick out are murmuring as one and looking back up. However, one thing this piece does do at certain times is it uses short sentences for effect and to make the sentence stand out. So for example, it's not fancy dressed. This is a big part of the story, a big plot point. So because of this, the writer has made it one short sentence to make it stand out. And it does, and it works. It does stand out to the reader, and it's an effective part of the story. Another one that stands out is this must be so embarrassing for you. So this is a little bit like the fancy dress one. It's almost exaggerating how the character feels by saying, oh, this must be so embarrassing for you. And the last one is the last word or the last sentence of the short story, I think I look fantastic. So it's almost like a tiny bit of a twist ending because we thought she was going to be upset, but I think I look fantastic. It subverts what the audience expects, and because it even uses a short sentence, it makes it stand out and a bit more effective for the reader. So elements of narrative writing, we're also going to look at style. So this is figurative language basically in sensory language. Every student has his or her own style. You will have your own style. And it's important because I'm going to mark about 150 of these. So it's really important that yours stands out from the norm. Okay, so this is again like the descriptive writing. You can always use all of these things. So a simile, saying something is like something or as. So you're like a miniature Buddha covered in hair. He's comparing his dog to a wise person. You can use a metaphor, so again comparing something but saying something is something. So for example, this person is comparing James Bond to a kite dancing in a hurricane, so almost saying that James Bond is out of control. You can have alliteration. This is where you repeat a certain sound for effect. You could use personification. This is giving something that's not human quality. So for example, the cupcake was calling to me. Cupcake can't literally call you. Onomatopoeia, it creates a sound effect that mimics the object described. You could have hyperbole, so this is exaggeration, so this is the best, or this coffee is the best in the world. So the whole point of this is the top end of the mark scheme. If you want to get distinctive structural or stylistic features, ambitious vocab, you can only really do that from using stylistic devices like I've described. Okay, so in the A star version, we have a few of these devices used. Like I've said before, a little bit like adjectives. So you shouldn't use adjective all the way through. You should pick and choose what figurative language you use. So for example, we've got a simile here where she's comparing herself to Cheryl Cole. We've got a couple of metaphors, so she's almost saying that she's the queen, so she's saying she's like the queen, so she's the leader of going to a fancy dress party. She's also saying that a star has risen, so almost she's comparing Katie Prescott to a star, a rising star in the sky. Onomatopoeia, we have a few. We've got oozing, buzzed, hisses. We've got personification, where almost saying her sight, is she's quietening down her sight. And we've got alliteration, plucking and polishing. So alliteration and onomatopoeia, these things are used for effect and emphasis to make something stand out. While similarly metaphor, it's almost, these things are used to make us feel like we are in the story. It helps us imagine being inside the narrative. So again, the 5 senses is a way of creating imagery in the reader's mind and to make them feel as though we are in the scene. So, but you need to keep it realistic. So you only use sensory language that would occur in your story. So again, in the A-star version, in the yellow we've got sight, in the blue we've got sound, in the red we've got touch. So all the way through this story, and it does go on as we go through the story, we can imagine being in there. We can see what the characters see. We can hear what the characters hear, and we can touch what the characters touch. Okay, so dialogue and punctuation, because like I've said a few times, you will use dialogue in this, and so you need to know how to punctuate it. So the basic rules of dialogue are all dialogue must be contained in quotation marks. Before the end of the quotation marks, you should punctuate with these in the brackets. New speaker, you need a new line. And include dialogue tags. So this is what I said about said, he said, she uttered, she paused, she shouted. Okay, and here are some examples if you want to pause the video. One thing you must make sure is that punctuation is inside the quotes. So a full stop or comma should always be placed inside the quotation marks. I can't wait to see Adele's new video, James said. It's supposed to come out next week. So you've got to make sure, so for example here, the comma is inside the speech mark and the full stop is inside the speech mark. So all your punctuation goes inside the speech marks. So for summing up, for a C or above, you will need to use ambitious vocab. You need to vary your sentence structure and length. So we've talked about you can use short sentences for effect. Use the 5 sentences to describe. Describe setting. Describe your character's appearance. Show what characters like using dialogue, but also when you're describing them, show not tell. Keep the sense of the character and tone throughout. So this character through the whole thing was a bit sarcastic, a bit funny. So you want to keep that throughout. You don't want it to be funny at the start and then suddenly turns very serious. To keep the same sort of tone throughout. Describe the atmosphere and special techniques such as similes and metaphors. So make sure you use figurative language. So that's the end of the video of this A-star narrative short story. Hopefully you got some tips on that, and hopefully you feel a bit more confident going into the controlled assessment. Any questions, feel free to email me or leave a comment section in this YouTube video. Thanks very much.